Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. Today, I was reading through This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, and she talks about cognitive dissonance. And the idea of cognitive dissonance in psychology, she defines as the mental stress or discomfort that is experienced by someone who holds two contradictory values, ideas, or beliefs at the same time. So this could be the stress that you feel when you drink, for example, even though you know you really shouldn't be drinking. A simpler stress that we might feel is if we're on a diet, but we see a piece of candy and we decide we really want to eat the candy, but we're on the diet. That stress that you feel, that's the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance. And so she talks about cognitive dissonance as it relates to addictive substances, because the stress that's caused by cognitive dissonance is really an important part of the cycle that keeps us in our addictive behaviors in the first place. So I'm going to read some from the book where she describes how this interacts with addictive behaviors to really keep us going in them. With addictive substances, we find more complications. You have a strong unconscious belief that alcohol relieves your stress and enhances your life. You have both a conscious and unconscious belief that cutting back or quitting is a legitimate sacrifice. You worry that quitting will be stressful. You don't have a substitute to take its place. In fact, life seems cheerless without it. And to make it all worse, everyone around you drinks. You now have a strong conscious belief that the amount you are drinking is harmful to your health, hurting your relationships, and negatively affecting other areas of your life. Since alcohol is an addictive substance, the conflict becomes physical as well as mental. You develop a tiny, almost imperceptible physical craving for the addictive substance, which makes it more difficult to quit. With time, this craving grows powerful. This is a neurological fact. Brain circuitry changes as a result of repeated exposure to an addictive substance, and over time, cravings grow in strength through increased dopamine levels, which are the result of a learned chemical response in your brain. Even when you're not drinking alcohol, the internal conflict rages because the craving is in constant disagreement with your desire not to drink. Add deteriorating health and relationships to the equation, and the internal conflict becomes increasingly more painful. So, if you ever encounter anybody who doesn't understand how addiction works and is curious why addiction causes so many problems, why it's so difficult to quit, this section of the book, and I'll tell you, it's on pages 117 through 119, does an excellent job of summing it up, especially the role that cognitive dissonance plays in that relationship and in that cycle. In fact, craving and the phenomenon of craving is and has been acknowledged as a critical importance in the cycle of addiction for decades. It's one of the core beliefs that forms the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step programs. And it is, as she says, scientifically proven, and we know the chemical mechanisms that happen in the brain that drive that craving. So she goes on to say, this phenomenon is the basis of addiction. All addicts lie to themselves and others. They do this to protect themselves and minimize the internal drama caused by their conflict of will. We become so good at making excuses, at blinding ourselves to the truth, that we believe our own lies. Being unable to trust yourself is terrifying and causes an incredible amount of pain. This is the pain of addiction. With alcohol, we can rarely solve the problem, solve the conflict, by simply changing our behavior. Since the unconscious mind has been conditioned to believe alcohol is our friend, that it helps us handle stress and improve our lives, we still desire to drink after we quit or cut back. We need willpower to abstain, but as scientists now know, willpower dries up, and the few drinks we allow ourselves to have become coveted. We give in, drink, and then feel guilty. We are in the midst of cognitive dissonance, a divided mind experiencing internal conflict. So, anybody who's tried to quit any kind of addictive substance via willpower probably recognizes this. We consciously recognize that whatever we're doing is bad for us. We got to stop whatever we're doing. And hey, this is not just necessarily substances. This is any kind of behavior where you consciously recognize, for example, just sitting around and not getting exercise and activity during the day. If you've gotten into a period where you're really not doing a whole lot of exercise or movement during the day, and you start to see negative health consequences to that. I was in this position about a year ago where I was not moving around a lot. I was at home because of the pandemic. I was just at home. I wasn't getting out much, and I wasn't getting much exercise. And all of a sudden, I noticed things. I was gaining tons of weight. My feet were swelling, and it was clear that I needed to get exercise and get moving. But I had a hard time doing that just based on willpower alone. I could make it happen for a little bit, but then all of a sudden the willpower would dry up, and I couldn't keep it going. Same thing happens with these other addictive behaviors. And so what we have to do is figure out, how do I get my entire brain to understand that quitting this addictive behavior, that changing my behavior is good for me? How do I get the entire brain to understand that? And so what she says is, when we realize we cannot stop drinking via willpower, the conflict in our brain increases. We've tried to change our behavior and found that difficult. We've tried to change our cognition or thoughts by reviewing lists of the horrible effects of drinking, and that too has failed. We try to justify our behavior by making excuses for drinking. We may not believe these rationalizations at first, but it's much easier to tell myself that it's okay to have a drink at 8 a.m. because it's 5 o'clock somewhere, than to experience internal conflict. Part of our brain realizes the excuses don't hold up, so we numb ourselves by drinking more. We try anything to overcome the conflict. We ignore and deny information that conflicts with our desire to drink. We're running out of options, and we don't understand why we can't overcome this, and then we start to blame ourselves. So one of the things that we have to do is really look at trying to educate ourselves about what is going on with the drugs, with the alcohol, and with any other behavior, in order to truly accept the benefits of changing it. And for me, I always use cigarettes as an example, because that was one that was incredibly difficult for me to quit. And, all the negative things about smoking, and I know them all. I have family members who have died from being smokers. I watched my grandmother sitting on our porch, hooked up to oxygen, while she was smoking a cigarette, and I've seen all these horrible things happen as a result of nicotine addiction and use. And yet I couldn't figure out how to quit until I read a book very much like this one, called Alan Carr's The Easy Way to Stop Smoking, I believe. I might have gotten that name a little wrong, but just look up Alan Carr. And he does the same thing Annie Grace does in this book. And he lays out all of the internal unconscious beliefs that we have about the drugs and alcohol that we're using. Because that's really what drives us. Those internal unconscious beliefs that we can't consciously change, those are what's creating this cognitive dissonance that continues to drive the discomfort that we then use alcohol and drugs to try to numb. And that's what keeps the cycle going. If we can start to take apart those unconscious beliefs that we have And we do that through educating ourselves about things like why do I believe that life is not going to be fun without alcohol or drugs? If we start to take those kind of beliefs apart, then we can remove some of the resistance that our unconscious mind has to changing our behavior, to addressing addiction. And that's when we can see a whole brain solution where we all of a sudden start to develop not just the opinion that we should quit, but the desire to quit. And when you have that desire to not be drinking, the true desire, when you want it with everything in your life, that's when success starts to become possible. That's what I found with alcohol. That's what I found with cigarettes as well, was that it wasn't until I got to that point where every part of me wanted to be done with it. Not just the conscious part, but the where I accepted that I could not have this in my life. That's when I was able to put things down and never look back. So more to come on this tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm looking at the idea of drinking makes me happy and why that unconscious belief is one that we need to reconsider and reconfigure in order to move forward. In the meantime, have a good day, and I'll be back tomorrow with more.